But since we got the stay of execution in September of 2015, we began to look hard at this case. We had some documents from the motel. This is a motel, so there were some documents that we had about people who stayed there. I would note that the police never investigated or never interviewed all the people who were staying at that motel. It's not that big of a motel. So the police should have at least, you would have thought, interviewed the people who were staying at the motel on the night when this took place. They interviewed one, a guy named John Pretty, who was next door. And John Pretty is an important witness, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. But through the documentation that we've been able to come up with, we identified 433 possible witnesses in this case. We're doing this 20 years later. We found, amazingly, 180 people and interviewed them. We attempted another 106 people, and we couldn't find them because it's 20 years later. We found 17 inmates who were with Justin Sneed in jail, many of whom talked about this case. We found people with direct knowledge of Justin Sneed's drug use. An important part of this case is the prosecution said Justin Sneed was a sometimes meth user, a sometimes drug user, and basically a hapless dupe for Rich Glossip. We found people who had extensive knowledge of Sneed's intravenous methamphetamine use. We found people that Sneed knew well. We found witnesses who were at or around the Best Budget Inn. We found employees and residents of the Tulsa Best Budget Inn, which was also owned by Barry Van Treese and had many of the similar issues. 29 people are deceased. We're still looking for at least 4 critical witnesses in this case. But we have 32 new witnesses with affidavits and experts who are prepared to testify in a new trial in Rich's case. So, what did we find? That's probably a good question at this point. Mm-hmm. What did we find? A critical thing about this case is, and I told you and I mentioned his name was John Pretty, was a witness who heard what happened to Barry Van Treese. He was in the motel room next to Barry Van Treese. And he told the police that night that he thought he heard a woman's voice in the room. There was another witness that we located. Actually, it was in a police report, so the police knew about him as well. His name was John Beavers. And he said he thought he heard a woman's voice too. Well, we do also know that Rich Glossip had a girlfriend, Deanna Wood, and the police actually took photographs of her to try to see if there was any bruising at all, that maybe she could have been that woman who was in the room. Mm-hmm. But apparently the police dropped it after that, and they never pursued that at all. So when we were talking with people and going around interviewing people who were at the Best Budget Inn, we started talking about, whether Justin Sneed had a girlfriend and whether she could have been involved in this. And we found some disturbing evidence that the police have never looked at and that Rich Glossip's lawyers never looked into. I mean, as a defense lawyer, I know that the police have their opportunity to do their investigation, and that's fine, but I want to do mine too, because I just can't rely upon what they say. I have to do mine as well. So we took a look at this. There was a fingerprint on a piece of broken glass. The room where this took place, the window was broken out that night. Sneed said that at one point in time he was pushed back by Barry Van Treese, and he had a baseball bat in his hand, and he hit the window and broke the window. And that glass had to be cleaned up. There was a fingerprint in that glass. They ran that fingerprint. It wasn't Justin Sneed, it wasn't Rich Glossip, and it wasn't Barry Van Treese. They never followed up on who it might be. Maybe it's that woman in the room. So now we have two witnesses who heard it. We have a fingerprint that they can't identify. In the second trial, it was brought out that Barry Van Treese was also stabbed. He was stabbed with a broken knife. That was later found in the room with Barry Van Treese. The stab wounds were in the back. So it is entirely possible that while he was fighting Justin Sneed from the front, this woman in the room was stabbing him in the back. But we've also found witnesses who will talk about what really happened in this case, how this went down, and about that woman who was with Sneed. We have witnesses who will testify about this girlfriend, who can corroborate the fact that he had this girlfriend. And you would think that the police would take a look at the situation and say, well, maybe if he had a girlfriend, we might want to know some more about that. But they never asked anybody that question. So this girl has never been found. We have one witness who we have heard about who has told somebody that he picked up a woman that night with blood on her shirt and blood on her shoes and took her away from the Best Budget Inn that night. We are looking desperately for that witness, obviously, as our investigation continues.
Gotcha. Well, let me interrupt you for just a second,
Sure.
if it's okay, because some members may not know, but Richard Glossip, we know, did not kill Mr. Van Treese. The
That's
reason
right.
he's on death row today is because somebody pointed a finger and said he coordinated with the individual who did kill, right?
Yes.
So the guy that did commit the murder has life in prison, and somebody pointed a finger at Richard Glossip, and he's now got the death penalty, which he's been on for 23 years, death row.
That's right.
When you went through your investigation, and me not being an attorney, it's hard for me to understand, but when you go through an investigation like this and you find new evidence, have you been able to get any help from anyone in Oklahoma, Attorney General's office, or anyone in your investigation? What do you do with the evidence? I mean, are you able to present it anywhere since it is new evidence? How does that work?
And if I may, I'd like to tell you a little bit about this new evidence, and then we can talk about what we're going to do with that evidence. But
Sure.
To answer your first question, we reached out to David Prater, who's the district attorney in Oklahoma County, back in 2015, and asked if we could have all of the information that he has in his files. What we got is like 21 banker boxes full of various documents that have followed Rich Glossip around for all these many years. They were not in any kind of order at all, so we had to go through all of that, and everything that we found that we began our work with came from those boxes. And Mr. Prater has said that he would not give us any of that information. We've subsequently asked for some more just recently, more targeted information, which I can get to in a minute. But if I can, I'd like to tell you about some of our new information, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
You're right about the fact that Justin Sneed, whose picture is up on the screen right now, is the one who killed Barry Van Treese. There is no question about that. Justin Sneed was working at the motel at the time, and he was a 19-year-old maintenance man. On the day of the crime, he left the scene. Rich never left the scene. He was found about 10 days later, interviewed, and that closed the investigation right there. What we found out, and again, what the state's case was that Justin Sneed was just kind of a light drug user, but was a guy who couldn't find work otherwise. He was kind of a hapless dupe, just sort of around the Best Budget Inn, couldn't find another job. The truth is, when Justin Sneed left the motel on that day, January 7th, he was employed again with the roofing crew that he came to Oklahoma with by the next day. He knew where they were at, he went back there, and he joined that crew again. So he had plenty of opportunities to work elsewhere. He wanted to stay at the Best Budget Inn. It was a place where he could get drugs and he could get women. And that's why he was there. We found out, we have evidence that he was a very heavy meth user. We have people who we found subsequent to all of this that said that he was a guy who would use methamphetamine intravenously, which is the sort of last stage of methamphetamine use. When you're using methamphetamine intravenously, you're in real trouble. You're just chasing the drug all the time. But the more evidence we found was after he was arrested, he was prescribed while he was in the county jail lithium. When asked about that, he said, well, I think it was for headaches. I don't think that they prescribed lithium for headaches. Lithium is an antipsychotic, and methamphetamine-induced psychoses is a real thing. So there's some evidence there. Furthermore, a few months after he was arrested, his lawyer asked for a competency evaluation. As a lawyer, you don't ask for that unless you can't communicate with your client, or you don't think your client can understand the proceedings. And he had a competency evaluation. And there was a psychologist whose name was Edith King who did that competency evaluation. By July, found him competent. But I would note that when she said, why are you here? He said, I killed my boss. He didn't say anybody hired him to kill his boss. The only people he told that to was Detectives Bemo and Cook when he was picked up. And they did the interrogation of him. And they gave him Rich's name. And again, this was at a time when he was in the throes of a heavy methamphetamine addiction. So we found evidence that Justin Sneed was, in fact, a serious, serious drug addict. But we found a lot of other witnesses as well, people who sort of told the real story. We had a documentary that was done a couple of years ago, and from that documentary, we had a new witness come forward. A woman who used to, and she had a very difficult time, she was working at the strip club that's across the way from the motel, but she remembers what happened at around that time because she spent a lot of time at the Best Budget Inn. I can't give you the names today of these witnesses. The last time we did that, in 2015, some of our witnesses were arrested and some of our witnesses were harassed, and so I'm going to withhold names at this point in time. But this witness said some things to us that the police should have known, that the defense lawyers should have known. She said, I knew a lot of drug addicts. When you are a drug addict, you chase two things, drugs and the money to pay for drugs. This was true for Sneed when I knew him. I knew Sneed as a back-to-back drug user. He was always looking for drugs or money for drugs. He talked mostly about drugs and girls. Sneed was cruel and violent. When Sneed was high, he was crazy. His entire face, including his eyes, changed. When he was coming off being high and needing more drugs, he was even crazier. I had personal knowledge of Sneed's plans to steal the money. To steal money. Not that money, but other money she was talking about. On one occasion, I personally witnessed him pick up a brick and announce that he was going to get, quote, the money and the drugs, close quote. Later that evening, he came back with drugs and had blood on his shirt and looked messed up. Sneed would use some of the girls who worked at the club to lure men into rooms so he could set them up and rob them. I knew Sneed to be violent with the girls who said no to helping him. Sneed did not like to be told no. He was not the kind of guy that would take orders from anyone. This witness was not present on the evening that the murder took place, or in the morning, but she came by a couple of days later, and she said she was at another motel, and that the girl who was the girlfriend of Justin Sneed, the girl that she knew was involved in this, drove up to the motel that she was staying at. This other woman was in the back seat of the car. She would not get out of the car, and so I went to talk with her. She said she was having a customer from the club drive her to his boat on a lake so she could get rid of a box from Justin Sneed. She looked very pale and acted like she was very afraid. And this witness says that this girl told her, "I am not going down for this murder." We found another witness who was actually known to the defense and the prosecution, although he was never talked to by anyone. I found this witness many years later, and he told me this story. Around March of 1997, I was incarcerated in the Oklahoma County Jail in Oklahoma for about 13 months. For somewhere around the next 6 to 9 months, I was housed in the same wing of the jail as Justin Sneed. During this time that I was on this tier, I saw Justin Sneed on a daily basis. There were other guys housed in our wing who were charged with murder, but Justin Sneed was the only one who spoke to me about his case. Even though it's been almost 20 years since I was in jail with Sneed, I remember some of the things that he told me about his case. It was a very memorable story and stuck with me all these years. Note that when I found this man, he had not seen anybody nor heard anything about this case, ever. He was never talked to by anyone, and I saw him 20 years later. I saw him with an investigator because I didn't want anybody to say that I was feeding him any information. I told him nothing. I just simply listened to what he told me about what he remembered. And this is what he told me. Justin Sneed was very clear that he killed the victim in this case. He always told me that he did it. Sneed described beating the man. And I think he also said he strangled him. Sometimes he seemed sorry for killing the man, whose name I have later learned was Barry Van Treese. Sneed told me that Sneed had a girlfriend at the time. He told me that Van Treese was well known to have a lot of money on him all the time. Sneed told me that he learned that Van Treese was supposed to have a large amount of cash on him the day that he was killed. He told me that he thought Van Treese had $20,000 to $30,000 in cash. Sneed told me that he learned about this money from Sneed's girlfriend, who knew Van Treese well enough to know that he had large amounts of money on him. I remember Sneed telling me that Sneed and his girlfriend thought Van Treese was rich. Sneed told me that he and his girlfriend made a plan to rob Van Treese. I recall that Sneed told me that either Sneed or his girlfriend worked at the motel that Van Treese owned. Sneed told me that his girlfriend set the whole thing up. I recall Sneed telling me that their plan was for the girlfriend to get Van Treese to go to one of the motel rooms to meet her on the day of the murder, and that either Sneed would be there waiting for Van Treese or Sneed would go into the room after Van Treese was already there. Sneed said he and his girlfriend did not intend to kill Van Treese, but only wanted to rob him. He told me that their robbery scheme fell apart because Van Treese didn't go along with it. He either fought back or did something else to upset the plan. Sneed said that things just really went wrong and that he ended up killing him. I remember that Sneed told me that when this murder took place, his girlfriend was in the room. Sneed told me that he then got the money from Van Treese's car, but he did not get all the money that they thought was there. Sneed sometimes commented that he couldn't believe that he had killed a man for so little money. He was angry that he and his girlfriend did not get their hands on the $20,000 to $30,000 that they thought Van Treese had. I remember him saying they got just a few $1,000s, which wasn't much compared with what they had expected to get from the robbery. I remember that Sneed had two major concerns while he was in the jail with me. The first was that he not get the death penalty. The second, that his girlfriend not be discovered or charged with this murder. During all the months that I spent with Sneed in 1997 and 1998, he never mentioned the name Richard Glossip to me.
You're fine.
He never said he was hired or paid any money to murder Barry Van Treese other than Sneed's girlfriend. He never mentioned anyone else being involved in the robbery or the murder. Sneed's story was always the same, that he and his girlfriend planned a robbery that got very messy and ended up with him killing the victim. You had raised, and I know my time is getting short here, you had raised the issue of did the district attorney help us? He has not given us any information. He is required to give us information if it is exculpatory information. If it would have helped Rich, he should have given it to his lawyers. There may be exculpatory information. We don't know because we haven't been given access to it. We don't know what they are hiding. You had some questions about what we can do going forward. I would, again, point you to the Oklahoma Death Penalty Review Commission study. There are great recommendations in there, one of which is that we be given open access to the district attorney's file through the clemency process, which would be very helpful.
With everything that you've found, not being an attorney, I don't understand the process. But with everything that you found, how can you not get relief in the courts?
The process in the courts is set up such that everything that needs to be raised, including ineffective assistance of counsel for not doing this investigation, must be raised in the first appeal from this case. These issues were not raised in the first appeal because none of the appellate lawyers did this investigation either. None of these witnesses have been contacted. So therefore, the courts will say that we are procedurally barred from bringing new information. The clemency process is supposed to be a fail-safe. The courts have recognized it as such. But the clemency process is not a fully adequate process in that we only get 40 minutes per side. So as you can see, I've already taken 30 minutes here or so of your time this morning, and I've barely scratched the surface of the information that we have. And the clemency process doesn't even allow us, I don't think, to bring in witnesses to testify. And then who's going to decide if they're credible or not? Is it going to be the members of the Pardon and Parole Board? They're probably going to defer to just the jury verdict and have it be that. So the clemency process is also a very dicey process for anybody who's trying to express their innocence at the time of the clemency process.
One thing I'd like to say, and I know that your feeling is the evidence that you're finding says that Richard Glossip is innocent. It doesn't negate the fact that Mr. Van Treese is dead. And I know he's got family members who are going through emotional times anytime they hear something like this, right? At the same time, I know that we had family members in Ron Williams and Dennis Fritz's case that were 100% behind their conviction until it was proven that they were innocent and they were released off of death row. That's why this is such an emotional thing. But I appreciate you taking a stand and doing what you think is right for Richard Glossip and for taking on that fight. We've only got about a minute left. Is there anything else that we can do that, as a state, what process needs to change, what needs to happen other than there's 200 and some odd pages in that book that tell us 200 things that we need to do. What in your mind is some of the most important?
And I would like to reserve a minute as well just to read a letter from Rich. I have a letter from Rich Glossip that I would like to read if I possibly can.
Is that okay with you?
Absolutely. I would have one question
Sure.
before we, if it's okay.
Absolutely.
Representative. My question is, and we've discussed a lot over the last 2 years. I appreciate the time we've got to visit on issues. And what I understand, and we've had a similar discussion as this, but the duty of our district attorney, of our AG's office, is to seek and carry out justice. Would I be wrong in that?
Yes, I think that the district attorney is ultimately supposed to carry out justice.
Right. And we know it's political that they have conviction rates, and that's important that they do a good job and have conviction rates. And we know that in death penalty cases that's high profile, and we understand the need that they want to win. They're not going to take a case unless they want to win, and rightfully so. And having that case, they should have the evidence. But here's my question. Do you not agree that in death penalty cases, that if they have that good of a case, that it's so sound that there's enough evidence to sentence a person to death, that should, at least the bare bones of that case should be public? We should be able to see it, and especially as chairman or people on the committee for public safety, when we're having these issues, it would be super beneficial that we have at least a factual basis, because I'm listening to your case and you present many great questions that should be looked at, a lot of evidence that ought to be looked at, but what I've not heard is the other side.
Absolutely.
And it's very difficult to sit here and hear one side but never hear the other side, and if the other side has that solid of a case, to me, it's show your hand and let's see it, and let's either move on or let's let you have a hearing.
Well, I can tell you, I wouldn't agree more. I would be happy if the district attorney gave me what he has. Let me give you an example right there, which I have up, is a letter that the district attorney's office received from a man named Fred McFadden. Fred McFadden is now dead. He died before I was involved in this case. But he wrote this letter to the district attorney's office. And it's obvious when you read this letter, you can see that it's actually the second letter that he wrote. So there's a letter that he wrote to Bob Macy, and he had something to say. And this was really probably about Justin Sneed and his guilt. And then it looks like the district attorney's office sent an investigator to talk to McFadden, which would be the normal thing to do. And then we have this third letter from McFadden. And look at what was basically said in this. He was talking about Justin Sneed, and he said, "It was an experience that truly haunts me. If you can imagine looking at someone whose eyes appeared void of expression, black and cold, all I could remember thinking was, 'Dear God in heaven, am I looking at the devil himself?'" This was information that was known. Fred McFadden was never called by anyone as a witness in this case. I don't know what that first letter said. I don't know what the investigator's notes say. I have a feeling they might be helpful to Rich's case when you have somebody saying that about the killer, but I don't have access to that, and nobody's ever given it to me. So, Representative Humphrey, thank you for saying that, because I'm with you. I'm in the mood of full disclosure. I'd love to show them what I have, and they show me what they have, maybe have an independent person take a look at it. There are things called conviction integrity units where these kind of things take place. That would be an extremely helpful circumstance for us in this case.
Thank you. And I think every one of our goals is I'm in agreement with Representative McDougall that I support the death penalty, but we want to make sure every step is taken that the person that is being executed is the right person that did the crime. So thank you very much for what you do. And yes, no problem on reading the letter that you asked to read.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Rich started by saying that I have never taken a deal, even though if I had, I would most likely be out by now. As I have said many times, true innocence stays true to innocence. I am Richard Glossip. I was convicted of a crime that I had nothing to do with. My world as I knew it was turned upside down, and my life taken from me before I knew it. I found myself in one of the worst places anyone could ever find themselves in. I was sent to death row in McAlester, Oklahoma, isolated from the world, taken from my family and children. I was put here because of the lies of the person who committed this crime and a failed justice system. He was given a deal which spared his life, but put mine in jeopardy. I have spent 23 years here at a very high cost. I have been brought to the brink of execution on 3 different occasions. In those attempts, I endured things no human being should even be put through. For the lack of a better word, I was tortured. I was put into a cell with bright lights, extremely bright lights, that stayed on 24 hours a day. The only thing I knew night from day is by the change of shift. At one point in September of 2015, I spent 54 straight days in that brightly lit cell. Being isolated from everyone. Then there were mock executions and even taunting by higher-ups and staff members. The worst one was on September 25th, when Director Patton came to my door after the last mock execution and informed me that they are ready to kill me. I endured a living hell, and now, even with mounting evidence of my innocence, they want to do it again. Where is the justice in that? Where is the justice I deserve? In those 23 years, I have witnessed and lost a lot. I have witnessed over 100 executions, with some going very wrong. And even though I was on death row, some of these people were my friends, and I think some of them were innocent. I lost family members as well, my mother, father, aunt, who was like a second mother to me, uncle, brother, and others, and I wasn't even allowed to say my goodbyes. The losses I have had to endure could never even be imagined by anyone who hasn't lived through it. We have to change our broken justice system. Innocent people should never be wrongfully convicted and put through the hell that is the death penalty. But the biggest issue here is thinking that clemency is a cure-all. When the courts fail to do what is right, using the strategy of being procedurally barred, there has to be a structure in place that can allow the Pardon and Parole Board, as well as the governor, the power to pardon innocent people, not to continue to imprison them. Clemency does nothing but continue to take even more from the innocent man's life if he only gets a life sentence. And that is nothing more than a longer, slow death sentence. In closing, you have the power to pass into laws acts that can prevent innocent people from losing any more of their lives or even being at risk of execution. As I've said, when the courts fail to do what is right, there has to be someone who can, or we just continue this vicious cycle. Richard Glossip.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Thank you for your time. Thank you for traveling all the way from Colorado to be here today, and appreciate all you do. Thank you.
So much.